What's good, y'all? You're listening to Code Switch, the show about race and identity from NPR. I'm Gene Demby.
And I'm B.A. Parker.
All right, so, Parker, I kind of want to set this banana scene for you. One you might have missed because of the everything. I'm just into the world, the everything going on. But back in April, Donald Trump went down to the Supreme Court to listen to oral arguments in this potentially huge and really closely watched case.
Wait, doesn't that violate the whole separation of powers thing?
Oh, you would think, because this was the first time a sitting president has ever done something like that.
Breaking with tradition and decorum. Very on brand.
Yeah, very on brand. So let me just set the scene for you, Parker. So Trump is posted up in the front row, and after he got there, he kind of scooched over to the center to get a better view. And Robert De Niro was in the courtroom for some reason. I don't know.
I mean, he famously is not a fan of the president.
Yes. But anyway, the arguments get started.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court. The Citizenship Clause was adopted just after the Civil War to grant citizenship to the newly freed slaves and their children.
That's D. John Sauer, the Solicitor General. So he's making the Trump administration's arguments.
Unrestricted birthright citizenship contradicts the practice of the overwhelming majority of modern nations. It demeans the priceless and profound gift of American citizenship.
Trump is listening to his administration's lawyers defend his executive order that says, actually, the U.S. is all wrong on birthright citizenship and that it's being extended to people who were never supposed to have it in the first place.
It operates as a powerful pull factor for illegal immigration and rewards illegal aliens who not only violate the immigration laws, but also jump in front of those who follow the rules.
All right, let me hop in real quick with an explanatory comma.
Go for it.
So birthright citizenship was written into the Constitution after the Civil War in the 14th Amendment to make sure formerly enslaved Black folks were granted citizenship.
Right. And the Supreme Court confirmed this in 1898 in this case called United States versus Wong Kim Ark, when they said basically, yes, if you were born here, you are a citizen. But the Trump administration's lawyers were arguing, among other things, that the 14th Amendment was never meant to be extended to people besides enslaved people and their descendants.
Even though we know, like you just said, there's Supreme Court precedent that already decided this almost 130 years ago.
Exactly. And so Trump is there in the front row watching as the conservative justices were pushing back on some of the arguments that his lawyers were making.
Why wouldn't we, even if we were to apply your own test, come to the conclusion that the fact that someone might be illegal is immaterial?
I would first cite Wong Kim Ark on that point, because Wong Kim Ark says you're...
Well, I'm not sure how much you want to rely on Wong Kim Ark.
But there is a statement in there that says, so long as they are...
And at some point, Trump is just like, I'm out. And he dips.
He just left?
Yeah, I mean, maybe he didn't like the way the questioning was going. Maybe he was bored. Maybe he was falling asleep. I don't know. But he left to go post on Truth Social.
Also very on brand.
Yeah, very on brand. And so Trump is not tweets. What, truths? What do you call it? I don't know what you call it, a post on Truth Social.
Who knows?
But he says, quote, "We are the only country in the world stupid in all caps, enough to allow birthright citizenship." End quote. And listener, this might shock you, but what Trump said is not true.
Most of the Western Hemisphere, like almost every country in the Western Hemisphere, has birthright citizenship, which is something that gets lost in the conversations.
Now that voice belongs to Daisy Hernández, and she's the author of the recent book, Citizenship, Notes on an American Myth. And she says citizenship is typically conferred by countries in one of two ways, right? So either by where you were born, that's birthright, or by where your parents are from. And Daisy said only 2 countries in the Americas do citizenship like this, by parentage. That's Colombia, where her mother was born, and the Dominican Republic. And over the last decade or so, these policies have created this big population of babies born to migrant families who are essentially stateless.
And if that were to happen here, we're talking about a lot of people who would be affected.
Yes.
I mean, I'm looking at some estimates by the Migration Policy Institute, and they project around 255,000 babies a year would be born without citizenship if this executive order takes effect. And down the road, they're projecting that by 2075, the U.S. could be home to 1.7 million people born here with no citizenship anywhere.
That is wild to think about. And the ruling on this from the court could come down literally any moment now. Like, we're obviously recording this before the decision. But this episode, y'all, this episode is not about that ruling. It's about the long fight over who gets to be a citizen of the United States and what we can learn from other countries that have already gone through where we might be heading.
Take it away, Gene.
When Daisy Hernández was a kid, her mom would tell her these bedtime stories, right? And they were not about wizards and dragons, but about borders and citizenship papers. So what do you think she was trying to tell you about what it means to be an American?
Yeah, my mother's from Colombia, and every night, pretty much, she told me the story of her immigration journey to the U.S. And she framed it as invitations, that she had been invited by a friend to come see the United States. And then she found work, and she never mentioned, oh, I'm on a tourist visa or any other details like that. And this was back in the 1970s. And I think part of what she was telling me was that there were a certain number of misconceptions that she had been given as an immigrant. Like, she literally told me, this was back in the day when they would tell you that American dollars were on the street just to be found, that they were falling off trees. And when she got here, of course, what she found was that she needed to have multiple jobs. And the reality was much harsher. She was working all the time, and she was so far from family for the first time in her life. So it was also very isolating, and she fell asleep every night crying. So I knew at a young age that the American dream was not what was being shared with me at school or in movies or TV shows, that there was a certain level of betrayal. And at the same time, that the kind of work opportunities that she had here, she had not been able to find in her home country.
I mean, your book is called Citizenship, Notes on an American Myth. So tell us about that mythology, why it's a myth to you.
It's a myth because we often think about citizenship as a status that you either have or you don't have. And part of what I argue in the book is that we can think of citizenship as a social construct, similar to race. And so people are familiar with the fact that if you walk into a store and you're a white person and you see a security guard, you probably don't think twice about the security guard. But if you're a Black person, you walk into that same store, you see a security guard, part of you is thinking, I might be getting followed.
I need to get my receipt when I leave.
Exactly.
Yeah, all that stuff, yeah.
And in a similar way, when you have citizenship, you don't think twice about getting in the car and driving 3 hours to go visit your child who's in college, for example. But if you're undocumented, or even now, I would say if you have a green card, there's a hesitation in getting in the car to go visit your child at college because you really have to think about what states am I going to drive through to get there. When we have citizenship, we show up at school and we just automatically enroll our 5-year-old in kindergarten. When you're undocumented, you really have to think about what it's going to require to enroll your child. Healthcare is dramatically different in this country for someone who's undocumented compared to someone who has citizenship. So just in the same way that race determines so much of our day-to-day life, citizenship also determines so much of what we experience in our day-to-day lives.
I mean, you're right that citizenship is typically understood and conferred in one of two ways, right? There's right of the soil, meaning if you're born someplace, then you are automatically a citizen of that place. That's birthright citizenship, which we have here. And then the other, right of the blood, which means that it's not where you're born, but where your parents are from that matters. And that's what confers citizenship upon you. So how did these two different ways of thinking about who is a citizen come to be?
Yeah, there's a really long history, but this birthright citizenship, which comes out of England, working on this book, gave me a totally new appreciation for how much of our legal system comes out of the British Empire.
Hmm.
And so part of it was that, if you were born in the kingdom of such and such king, you were his subject by being on that land. And then, concepts evolved from there. Most of the Western Hemisphere, like almost every country in the Western Hemisphere, has birthright citizenship, which is something that gets lost in the conversations, with the exception of my mother's country, actually, Colombia, has citizenship through parentage. And
Hmm.
they found themselves in such an awkward position because Colombia is not historically a nation of immigrants. But with everything that's happened in Venezuela, they have now more than 1 million immigrants from Venezuela, which
Huh.
means that they have I think more than 20,000 children who were stateless because they were born in Colombia to Venezuelan parents, not Colombian parents.
Huh.
And so Colombia had to pass special legislation so that they wouldn't have thousands and thousands of stateless children in their country.
So are those children citizens of Colombia, or do they just have special provisions?
With the law, there is now bureaucracy set up, I think is the
Mhm.
best way to say it, so that there's a pathway to citizenship for
Gotcha.
them.
You mentioned the other country in our hemisphere that does not have birthright citizenship, which is the DR, the Dominican Republic. And you say what's been happening in the DR over the last decade or so could be seen as a harbinger of what's to come here in the U.S. if we get rid of birthright citizenship. So could you tell us what's been happening in the DR?
Yeah, the scholars have really alerted us to this. And I relied so much on the work of so many different scholars across disciplines to produce this book. And what they've told us is in the Dominican Republic in 2010, they changed the constitution to deny birthright citizenship to the children of undocumented immigrants. And they were basically targeting their Haitian communities there.
Yeah, and the Haitian communities who were affected by this, these were not recent immigrants to the DR. These were Dominicans of Haitian descent, people whose families had been there for generations.
Yeah. And then 3 years later, they said, now this is going to be retroactive to the 1920s.
Oh, wow.
So it is absolutely a harbinger of what could happen in the U.S. as well if the Supreme Court decides to not uphold the 14th Amendment. In our case, though, it wouldn't be thousands, it would be hundreds of thousands. And then you see how the door is open for the possibility of making it retroactive in some way.
Yeah. But in the U.S., we know that birthright citizenship became the law of the land here after the passage of the 14th Amendment. But you say that Black people who were enslaved were already claiming this birthright for themselves long before the Civil War, long before the 14th Amendment.
They were going to courts. They were going to conventions. They obviously had newspapers, and they were absolutely insisting on their citizenship in this country as well as their freedom in this country. And so even though there had been a tradition of birthright citizenship, the 14th Amendment is really owed to Black Americans fighting for that even before the Civil War.
I mean, the standard story is that the 14th Amendment settled this question of who counts as America. But you say the people who wrote the 14th Amendment knew exactly what they were doing, that they knew it was never just about extending citizenship just to Black folks, to newly emancipated Black folks. Walk us through what the architects of the 14th Amendment knew then.
Yeah, they were concerned about what this would mean for the country. And because of congressional records, we know that there was a congressman who said, wait, this would give citizenship to the children of gypsies and the Chinese. And another congressman who I think was the son or grandson of Irish immigrants said, yes, absolutely, that is what it means.
Right.
So they did know while they were working on this that this would have a huge impact in terms of what the immigrant community in the U.S. looked like at that point. And they pushed it through. That said, keep in mind that just 30 years after it was ratified, the United States was in court, with the famous Wong Kim Ark case in 1898, where basically the question before the Supreme Court was, does this apply to the children of immigrants? ? And the court said, yes, it does. And he was the son of immigrants who were actually no longer living in the United States at that point. But the court was very clear this still applies to anyone who is born on this land, with the exception of Indigenous Americans who didn't get citizenship until 1924. And I think it's important to highlight that, right? Indigenous folks in the geographical borders of the U.S. have had such a different relationship to citizenship than all the other groups. They weren't necessarily all trying to get U.S. citizenship, right? They were not making the assertions to U.S. citizenship as a community in the way that Black Americans were in the 1800s. You had some Indigenous people who wanted it, and then you had others who, as I quote in the book, a tribal leader who said, we don't want to vote in the white man's election. We have our own laws. We have our own nations. So it's a very different relationship. And that's part of why at the hearings recently in April, before the Supreme Court about birthright citizenship, that's why you heard these very strange interactions around just wanting to confirm, are you saying that the 14th Amendment does apply to Indigenous people? And the answer had to be no, it doesn't if you're doing a textual read of the amendment.
You have this graph in your book that we really like because it synthesizes a lot of these ideas we've been talking about. So could you read that for us?
Yes. It is worth pausing to consider that the only reason we have a constitutional amendment on birthright citizenship is that we went to war over citizenship for Black Americans. The amendment was not the result of civil discourse, of compromise, of long negotiations into the night. The Supreme Court's decision in Dred Scott declared that Black people could not be citizens of the United States, not even if they were free, and this accelerated the start of the Civil War, which led to the creation of the 14th Amendment, since that was the only way to undo the Dred Scott decision. We did not reason our way toward birthright citizenship. We killed one another over the course of about 1,343 days. We killed one another over the origins of citizenship, and more than 150 years later, we are fighting about it again.
When we come back, more with Daisy Hernández. Stay with us. Gene, and just Gene for this section, code switch. So the Supreme Court is set to rule on this case that could potentially change the rules for who even gets to be an American. So I've been chopping it up with and picking the brain of Daisy Hernández. She's the author of a new-ish book called, appropriately, Citizenship, Notes on an American Myth. So this case that we're all waiting to hear the resolution for, that's on the Supreme Court, is not the first time Republicans have tried to get rid of birthright citizenship just in recent decades. I mean, you write in your book that gutting birthright citizenship even made it into the party's official platform in the 1996 presidential campaign. I was young then, but I did not remember this at all.
I didn't remember it either.
Right? So, I mean, like, first of all, like, there's this idea, I think, that there's like this nativist streak that is a sort of product of MAGA republicanism, right? So can you tell us about the lineage of this Republican push to redefine citizenship and how the public has responded as they've introduced these measures to try to undo birthright over the last couple decades?
I think it's important to remember legislation in 1986 signed by Ronald Reagan that created a pathway to citizenship for about 3 million, mostly Mexicans, who were undocumented. And there was such a backlash to that. And
they called it amnesty for immigrants, for
amnesty
illegals.
For immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
And there was such a backlash to that. And I think this is part of that backlash as a way to control the fact that the racial demographics of who's a citizen in the United States were beginning to look very different than they had in the past.
Yeah, you write in your book that Reagan signed that sweeping 1986 amnesty bill into law, and then the backlash from that was the beginning of this push to get rid of birthright. It was called the Citizenship Reform Act of 1995.
Yes, you had legislation introduced, and I thought what was so important there was the Justice Department sent their top constitutional scholar to testify about this. And the man said, it is unconstitutional on its face. He also pointed out what I think many of us understand, which is that it would, quote unquote, create a permanent caste of what he called aliens, generation after generation born in America, but never to be among its citizens. So there was an awareness of what an incredible impact it would have if that legislation ever made it through, which is what we're arguing about again right now. But yeah, they did not give up with that. So there was a representative from Iowa, Steve King. Some people might remember him because he was pushed out of Congress, and he was very perplexed about why the word, white supremacist or supremacy was a bad word, or, why that was a problem. He introduced legislation, I think, starting in 2011, trying to get, birthright citizenship essentially done away with, insisting that the children of undocumented immigrants not be recognized as birthright citizens. So it has been part of the party. I think for a long time, people saw it as being on the fringe, and as with everything else in the Trump administration, what was once on the fringe is now at the center.
Or more recently, Judge James Ho, who was on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, a very powerful court, and he's someone who might be angling to be the first Asian American justice on the Supreme Court, but he's been a dogged critic of birthright citizenship. Like, what's the argument that he makes against it?
Yeah, his argument is that we wouldn't give citizenship to people who were invading this country. We wouldn't give citizenship to the children of soldiers who were invading this country. And of course, he is suggesting that undocumented immigrants are invading the country, which is a claim that Trump and other Trump administration officials have made. What I found so fascinating about him is that he was born in Taiwan. He has citizenship through his parents and is a naturalized citizen of the United States. And that's fascinating because the Trump administration is moving wholeheartedly to denaturalize, as many Americans as they can.
Judge Ho has compared undocumented immigrants to what he calls invading aliens, and he's likened those invading aliens to the enemy combatants captured after 9/11. So what does that tell us about what Judge Ho and people who agree with him think about American citizenship?
They're presenting it as though it's something that is, incredibly valuable, and almost like, this idea that it cannot be purchased. It can't, that it can't just be given away to people. That it's invaluable,
Right.
actually.
It's invaluable and ineffable and
Yeah. And then meanwhile, the United States has a program that sells U.S. citizenship. It's the EB-5 visa program, and it's a complex program. But basically, if you have $1 million, you can purchase your way to a green card in the U.S. for yourself and your family. But it means that even here in the U.S., and many countries sell their citizenship in a similar way, there actually is a price tag. So when people come to that U.S.-Mexico border, and Americans are upset about it, what you're actually upset about is that they don't have $1 million for each family. But that's what we've decided, is the price for citizenship in the U.S.
The Trump administration came in and was like, the price of the brick going up. Like,
yes.
Okay. But the arguments for gutting birthright citizenship have become increasingly novel. Like, you point to all these people trying to kind of read ambiguity into the wording of either the 14th Amendment itself or the writings of judges back in the 19th century. And you write that the reasons to get rid of birthright citizenship run a loop in your mind. Can you walk us through that loop that you were talking about?
Yeah, there came this moment where I felt like I was going a little crazy because the list it just kept growing. The more reading I did, the longer the list got. So there was the idea that, that your parents are undocumented, and so your parents don't have an allegiance to this country, so neither do you. And part of that is that you're not subject to the laws of the United States, which is very strange because otherwise you are subject to the laws of the United States. And there was the argument that you're invading the country, and so that's why your children don't get to have citizenship. And the idea that, you don't get to have citizenship because neither you nor your parents were enslaved Black Americans in this country, because your domicile, you heard a lot about domicile at the Supreme Court hearings, because where you call home is not the U.S., it's actually a different country. I mean, the list just grows and grows and grows.
And those things on that list kind of like are incompatible with each other. And it almost makes you wonder, like, for the people who think of birthright citizenship as this, this giant mistake, how would they define citizenship? Because they seem to be defining it in this like sort of negative definition, right? It's like, this is what it is not, right? But like, what is the affirmative argument they make for what constitutes being a citizen of the United States?
It's interesting because you rarely hear that explicitly
Mhm.
articulated, but and I think part of that is that when you're trying to run an authoritarian government, you need to be constantly appealing to people's fear and greed, right? So you have to put the emphasis on people are invading this country, right? That kind of language, because you want your supporters to be angry and terrified all the time. And so the positive doesn't quite do it. But I think it's very easy to argue, and obviously Trump and his administration has said many times implicitly that they see this as being a white country, a white republic, and this idea of trying to get back to this idealized past. So there's this idea that being an American is what it meant to be an American, let's say in 1950, right?
Mhm.
And part of what I argue in the book is that, we're in this moment to some degree as a backlash to the fact that in the 20th century, what we saw was the rise of a new citizen, that came out of the civil rights movement, the gay liberation movement, women's rights movements. And these were people who were birthright citizens, but had been denied the rights of citizenship for so long. And so you had these incredible social justice movements that now meant you had a new citizen, a citizen that was making a new set of demands on the government, but also on institutions, Some of us forget that there was a point in time when you would not walk onto a college campus and see a Black professor. Now you do, right? There was a fight for that. And so I think we can't discount the degree to which the political moment that we're in was such a backlash to actually incredible successes that
Yeah.
we had.
I mean, and you sort of alluded to this before, but like, we have on the one hand, this Trump administration was trying to make it so hard for people who are born here to automatically become citizens. And on the other hand, right, they're also making it harder to just be here as a non-citizen who has some sort of provisions like green cards or visas or whatever, with the ways that they're sort of, slow rolling those applications or just denying them outright. Like, can you help us make sense of that? Like, what is the ultimate end game, do you think?
I think that this Trump administration has been very clear that they want this to be a white country again. And you can see that just in terms of, the countries that the administration targeted for blocking visas, for not letting people come into the country, even to visit their family. It was something like 18 countries, and more than 10 of them were on the African continent, right?
Mm-hmm.
In addition to all the statements that he's made about, why can't we have more people from, I think Norway was one of the countries that he said.
Right.
But again, I think I want to emphasize that we are not going through a unique experience because many, many countries have had authoritarian leaderships. So there's always this kind of hearkening back to it was better before. There's always this idea of, we need people who have a certain kind of genealogy or blood, right? Like eugenicist movement that was alive and well in the U.S.,
Mhm.
is still here with us. And actually, part of what I describe in the book is, I saw this happen in my own family in the sense that my father was a political refugee from Cuba. The Cuban Adjustment Act of 1966 opened the doorway for him and so many thousands of Cubans to come to the U.S. and have a pathway to citizenship.
Mhm.
This is happening like in the 1970s and 80s at the same time that the country is targeting and deporting Haitian immigrants.
Right.
So it was very clear, it was just clear even in that moment that there was a very racist agenda.
I mean, this is, I think, obvious to us because we talk about race all the time on the show, but could you actually talk about these sort of twinned dynamics of creeping authoritarianism and like expanded nativism and national, like how those sort of two things work together?
Yeah, I think that an authoritarian government ultimately wants to control the population, right? And so it has an agenda. Usually in our case, there's a racialized agenda to make the country white again in some way. And so that absolutely ties in with the idea of immigrants, very famously or infamously, I should say, that Trump said, immigrants are polluting our blood. It's language that Hitler used as well. And so the idea is that we need to close the borders, stick with each other, keep foreigners outside, because they're going to be metaphorically and in other ways, polluting what this country is. I mean, there's a racialized agenda to this. Absolutely. While at the same time, part of what I discovered in working on this book was the work of Professor Achume at UCLA, a legal scholar. And part of what she argues in terms of thinking about citizenship is that, a country like the United States functions as an empire. And this is where I always have to pause and remind people, like, not exactly the British Empire or the French or Spanish empires, but as an empire in the sense that through federal policies, foreign policy, and through our corporations and our military support of our corporations, we have been so deeply involved in the day-to-day lives of people in the global South.
We've been talking about that quite a bit on the show recently, as a matter of fact.
And so part of what Professor Achume says is that this means that people in the global South, right, are essentially colonial subjects. And so when people arrive at that U.S.-Mexico border, their day-to-day lives have been so deeply impacted by decisions in Washington. And so they are already citizens, right? That citizenship is not limited by a geographical border, but instead by how do policies impact those day-to-day lives of people. And of course, we see this very intensely with Venezuela, where, the Trump administration went in and literally took out their president. But in the 20th century, the U.S. was involved in something like between 30 and 40 regime changes in Latin America, sometimes explicitly with military and sometimes with secretive help or assistance. So it's also, we have a possibility to think differently about citizenship.
So we don't know exactly when the Supreme Court's decision on birthright citizenship is coming down. We know it will be soon, though. Soon. Like, by the time you hear this, there might have been, the decision might have dropped. The court's conservatives did express some skepticism during oral arguments about getting rid of it. But the fact that it even was taken up by the court has people understandably very worried. So I'm curious, how are you, as somebody with birthright citizenship, feeling as we wait, again, to hear what the court decides literally any moment now?
I am very anxious. I'm a naturally anxious person, but I am anxious because the Supreme Court has broken our hearts so many times. However, many legal scholars, not just from the left or progressive circles, but in the center, say that they expect that the court will uphold the amendment. It wouldn't be shocking if they upheld the 14th Amendment while perhaps giving the administration some leeway. But I am nervous. I am nervous for exactly what you identified, which is the fact that they even took up the case says something. And we don't know yet exactly what it says.
Daisy Hernández is a writer and editor. She's also an English professor at Northwestern, and her recent book is called Citizenship, Notes on an American Myth. Thank you so much, Daisy.
Thank you for having me.
And y'all, that is our show.
You can follow us on Instagram at NPR Code Switch. If email is more your thing, ours is codeswitch@npr.org. This episode was produced by Jess Kung. It was edited by Courtney Stein. Our engineer was Jimmy Keeley.
And we would be remiss if we did not shout out the rest of the Code Switch Massive, right? I mean, that's Christina Kala, Xavier Lopez, Maya Dangerfield, Leah Dinella, Dahlia Mortada, Barton Girdwood, and Yolanda Sangweni. As for me, I'm Gene Demby.
I'm B.A. Parker.
Be easy, y'all.
Hydrate.